Jun lived in a small village along a marsh. It was a tiny town, a population of less than 1,000 people. The only thing that attracted people to come to the marsh was either fishing, bird watching, or gathering bamboo. Jun had gone off to high school in another town, but frequently visited his family when there was no school. One day when he was close to graduation, he went home to talk to his parents about his future. Like his family and the others, he collected bamboo when he was a child and sold it into town. But times are changing and that industry was dying. Jun needed to think about what he would do for his future. His parents went on an errand, so he went outside to sit on the porch. As he sat on the porch of his small house, he began to reminisce about his childhood. Jun was a very diligent, kind, and even somewhat playful boy. He thought of his childhood, and maybe he would decide to become a teacher because he loved working with children so much. He reminisced about playing with one young girl, 4 years younger than him, who mysteriously disappeared in the marsh. When he was younger, they used to play, laugh, and spend time along the marsh looking for frogs, turtles, and other aquatic wildlife. Unfortunately, the marsh being what it is, and even being told thousands and thousands of times over to be careful around the marsh, the girl disappeared. Everyone assumed that the marsh had claimed her, as there were many stories of hundreds of people, including fishermen, bird watchers, and other tourists who just stepped in the wrong place and vanished, likely being sucked down in the more unstable areas of the marsh. Only his grandmother had hinted it might be something else, but nobody heeded her old wives' tales. As he thought about the young child, he remembered that they used to play together, although she was a very pale, very frail and weak individual. She was often sick and had to stay in her home many of the days that he wanted to play. Despite being very frail, she seemed to be very connected to nature, always talking to the frogs, to the dragonflies, and even the spirits of the marsh. He thought about her because he was getting ready to leave this town once and for all, and she was the one friend he had during his childhood. Of course, Jun made many friends at school. Jun could make friends with anyone. But in his hometown, there were so few people, she was the only one that he could play with, and luckily were good playmates. He was devastated when he heard that she disappeared. And while sitting on the porch, trying to remind himself of what she looked like, her big, frog-like eyes, her cute smile, she was like a sister to him. He always watched out for her, like a big brother would. But as fate would have it, he had to go to school. And after he left, that is when she disappeared. While sitting on the porch, he began to remember, and he felt like he was going to cry from the pain in his heart, and then tried to shrug it off. But then he heard something in his mind. A voice. It sounded like the girl's. He couldn't believe it. He got off the porch and went up to the shore of the marsh. The closer he got to the marsh, the stronger the voice in his head he could hear. At first he wasn't afraid at all. It felt familiar. Maybe she had survived. Though unlikely, all these thoughts racing through his head, he kept clearly hearing her voice in his head. He looked and he looked, didn't see anything at first. Then he heard, "Do you want to play?" And he looked down. Between some reeds in the water, a frog-like creature, sharp teeth, big frog-like eyes, was staring straight at him. It was the eyes. And the childlike voice that came from this creature made his skin crawl. Fear started to cough up from the depths of his soul. At first he couldn't break the gaze of the eyes of this creature. There was something familiar about them, too familiar. And at that moment, he felt he was getting weaker and weaker, like the life force of his soul being drained. He stood there, trying to shake it. He couldn't move. He could only hear the voice in his head, saying, "Come in the water, let's play." Finally, he mustered all the strength he could and screamed to the top of his lungs. The creature flinched, and the draining ceased. Jun pulled himself together and ran into the house, grabbing his things, to leave the town and head back to the school dorm. All the while, he heard in his mind, "Don't go, stay with me and play." And June, while gathering his things, shouted back in his mind, "No way, I'm out of here." He grabbed his things and fled. On his way to the train station, he ran into his parents. He looked at them and said, "Grandma was right. There is something out there. It got her. It got her all those years ago." The parents, dumbfounded, looked at him and said, "What are you talking about?" "The Kappa. It's in there. It got the girl," June replied. The father laughed in disbelief. The mother just stared at him, looking concerned, and said, "Are you okay?" June replied, "I'm going back to the school. I'm going to stay there." And the parents shrugged and said, "Okay." When he got to the dorm, he sat down. He realized what had happened. Those things that live in the marsh drain you, pull you in, use your life force, and turn you into one of them. They feed on others, the weak, the unfortunate, to survive, all hidden in the darkest parts of the marsh. He wondered perhaps they never attacked June's parents because June's parents were very active and strong. Despite this, June never went back to the marsh again and went on to be a teacher, vowing to himself that if he could, he would make sure that no one ever would succumb to such a horrible existence. As for his parents, they moved out, found better work elsewhere. But for those who remained in the village, still had many strange disappearances and many strange, inexplicable little happenings. June later heard a story about a family who had an encounter with the Kappa. They later went on to have 11 twins. All looked alike, both boys and girls. Other stories were skeletal remains of Kappa that are still enshrined in a small local temple. It is said to those who visit the temple, if they touch or come close enough to the skeletal remains, they too will have many children, all twins. The story was even printed in a large newspaper. And though most people believed it to be just sensationalism, for June, he never went back. He never even considered it, and for the rest of his life, he remained in a large city, away from any place that was hot, muggy, or swampy.